And as you can see, it is in green color. That means you can extend the functionality by adding our own message handlers. Okay, so message handlers we can write down to do some form of pre-processing. Next in the pipeline, we'll see that there is a routing dispatcher. This class HTTP routing dispatcher will decide which controller and which action method to invoke based upon the route. Okay, so in the HTTP request message, there is a header. In the header, we have the URL. In the URL, we have the path. Okay, depending upon the path name, the routing will be determined. So this class is responsible for determining the which controller to select and which action method to select. But before that, there is a provision of message handler. So there are two types of message handler. One is route specific, or we also call as the per route message handler. Or you can have very general message handler. So this is the very generalized message or global message handler, and this is the per route message handler. Okay, specific to a particular route. Suppose my route is something like say API slash products. So this is my one route. Another route might be API slash customers. So I can have the message handler specific to this route or this route. Okay, I can have route specific message handlers. Okay, either this or this. So there are two types of message handler: global, this one, or you can have the route specific message handler. If it is route specific, it will be executed. Otherwise, it will go to the HTTP controller dispatcher. So this will decide. It will decide which controller to execute. So it will instantiate the API controller. Okay. So we have written multiple controllers. So it will instantiate the appropriate controller class. Then the next step is to select the action method. Okay, out of multiple actions which are part of the controller, it will decide the appropriate action method. Now in the pipeline, the message will be forwarded to the filters, authentication filters. So again, you can see this is in green color. Notice that it is in green color. It is an extensibility point. We can define our own authentication filter. So right now we are not discussing this because here we can authenticate the user. In the pipeline, if the user is authenticated based on the credentials of the user, the next step is to authorization filter. So if the user is authenticated, but now whether that user has right to perform some action. For example, a normal user cannot add a product, but only admin can add a product. So if we have add product method, then that can be only authorized by the admin, not by the normal customer. So this authorization filter will take care of that part. And again, if it is authorized, then further that HTTP request message would be further go into the pipeline. The next step is to model binding. Okay, so that will be bound to the appropriate model data as we have seen. And then there is an action filter. So we already seen the use of action filter. So this is the extensibility point where we have written our own action filter. So they will be executed just before the action being executed. So we have seen on action executing and on action executed. So these are the 2 points where those will be executed. And finally, invoking the action. Okay, finally invoking the action. And once it is executed, that invoke the action, send back the reply, and it will go back into the pipeline. It will pass through this pipeline. Once again, whatever the result generated by this action method will be converted. So there is one more step. So what will happen in result conversion? Can anyone say? What will happen in result conversion? In one word, can you give the answer? Result conversion means nothing but performing the serialization. Serialization of data, right? And if there is an exception, suppose our action method is executing and an exception occurs, which is not handled. So uncaught exceptions will be handled by the exception filter. Okay, that will be sent to the exception filters. So that will handle it and it will generate the error response. And then it would be sent back in the pipeline. Once again, it will pass through in the pipeline. And ultimately, we'll see that this message should be finally of this type, HTTP response message. Okay, final response message is of HTTP response message, which will be handled by the HTTP server. It will give it to the client. It will actually generate the HTTP response, which will be sent back to the client. Okay. So is this pipeline architecture clear? How the message passes through the different phases, different component of this Web API framework? Few things we know, few things we will cover in the next lecture. Some of the things like today we'll discuss the exception handling, and this message handling we'll discuss in the next lecture. And authentication will also discuss in the subsequent lecture. But is it clear? Or any doubt this architecture of this Web API framework? And here in the same diagram, the few processes are described in detail, like model validation. Okay, here you can see that what will happen in model validation, model binding. So request message is consisting of URI, headers, and body part. This will be mapped, like if there are some binding, so it would be by the media type formatter. If the data contents of complex type. If the data is of complex type, media type formatter will be handled. If the data is of simple type, these two classes will handle it, or the classes that implement this interface will implement it. If it is other type, then HTTP parameter binding will take care of this. Similarly, what will happen in the result conversion? Let us see that. What happens in the result conversion? We have seen what our action method can return. If the action method has already generated the response, return type is already HTTP response message, then there is no processing is required. Okay, no processing is required. But if the return type is void, the framework will automatically convert it into the HTTP response message with status code 204, no content. If the return type is of IHTTP action result, then it will be executed by the call execute async, and it will generate the HTTP response message of this type. If any other data type, then there is a class called iContent negotiator that will check whether there is a corresponding type I can convert into. So if the request is for say JSON type, that means the client is writing something like this: accept application/JSON. If client request header has this value, accept application JSON, then it will use the appropriate media type. It will use the JSON media type formatter. If it is application/XML, it will use the XML media type formatter, which will convert or serialize the data into the JSON or XML respective type as part of the content of the HTTP response message. So this is what we mean by the result conversion. And you can see that these are the extensibility points. So if you want to support some other format, then you can do so. By extending this iContent negotiator, you have to implement your own custom class that implement this interface, and you can make it part of the Web API framework. So this architecture is flexible, and due to the flexibility, it is powerful. Okay, it is much flexible, it is powerful, and it is simple also. You can easily see in the architecture that how these messages are handled at different points and how cleanly the messages are handled at different phases of this pipeline architecture. Is it fine, everybody getting or not? Any of the term you can't understand in this architecture, because that is important. And otherwise, when we will discuss it, we'll anyway go into the more details. Like, but suppose if you don't know what is message handler, route handler, the basic question you can ask, and more detailed information will cover during the subsequent lecture, today's and subsequent lecture. I have said this poster basically in the Google Classroom, so you can download it and further you can refer it, so that you can easily know how the message traverses through the different phases of this framework, and then finally how it has been converted to the HTTP response message, and where we can extend it, where we can customize it. Okay, now we'll discuss exception handling in the Web API framework. So once again, let me share my slide. Okay. So normally what happens if there is an exception, uncaught exception, that will be handled by the exception filter. If your any get method, any action method, the code is written and it is not handled, an exception is generated and it is not caught, then exception filter will handle that exception. So sometime we can it will generate the HTTP response message. Okay, it will generate the HTTP response message. With status code 500, and reason phrase is internal server error. Okay, so it is irrespective of the error, it will always generate this message with this status code and this reason phrase. So in addition to that, we can also handle exception on our in our own way. We can specify what exactly went wrong. Secondly, there is a facility of exception filters, custom exception filters. So let us see. So if you want to handle exception ourselves, then use this HTTP response exception. Or you can go for the exception filter. It acts similar to action filter. You can specify the exception filter. You can assign it to an action method, or even you can assign it to a controller, or you can specify exception filter globally. so that it can handle the exception occurred at different places, any places. And we'll also see the nice way of sending the exception through this object HTTP error. So there are three ways in which we can handle the exception. So let us see them one by one. First, we'll look at the HTTP response exception. This is the documentation. What are the constructor and the property? So one of the important properties response. Okay. So this class HTTP response exception class has the response. So that will contain the HTTP response message. It will have header, content, and even you can modify it, right? And you can use this property to get the value. Okay, you can use this property to retrieve the value. So this is a sample code. So suppose this is the method get product with ID. So if we are want to return the product with a given ID, we are searching into the product list. If it is found, it will be returned. Otherwise, it will. So we are using the link query. So what if the product is not found in the product list? We are checking with the null. Then we throw new HTTP response exception. Now here there is a this constructor is overloaded. We can specify the status code. So right now not found. So normally we use 404 not found. So here this is the get request. So it implies that the product that we are looking for with the given ID is not found in the database, right? So you throw that exception, HTTP response exception, and it will pass through that pipeline directly. Okay, it will not be handled by the exception filter. Otherwise, we can return the product. And it will automatically generate the HTTP response message. And within the body or within the content, product will be there. Okay, so it will have a header and content. So content, basically it will send the product as part of the content, and it will use the appropriate media type formatter to serialize this product. Okay, so that will be done automatically. It will. We are not writing the code, but it is there. Suppose I am searching for I am issuing the get request for the product ID 3, which is available as part of the static product list, and we are getting the response 200. Okay. And if you look at the response, you should get the product information. But what if I give the value ID equal to 4, for which the product doesn't exist? We get this message 404 not found, and further, right? So this is how we can handle the exception by writing our own HTTP response exception. Secondly, if you want to modify the data or if you want to modify the content, then also we can do so. Suppose the product with the ID given ID doesn't found, then we can check for the null. We are firing the link query on the product list. Now we can generate this HTTP response message. So now we are creating our own response message with the status code not found. And as part of this response message content, we are specifying the string that no product with the given ID found. And reason phrase is product ID not found. Normally, for not found, the status code is 404 and reason phrase is not found. So that also can be changed. We can change the reason phrase. We can change it to product ID not found, right? So this customization is possible. Otherwise, and then you throw this HTTP response exception, and as part of the constructor, you provide your own response. Okay, as part of this. So basically this will generate the HTTP response message with your own header. You can customize the content, you can customize the status code, you can customize the reason phrase. So once again, you can use these utility classes like string content, and in the built-in class, we just create the instance of HTTP response message as and when required, and we can update the header or content of this response message. So this is another way. So once again, we'll go for we try to retrieve the product with the ID 4, which doesn't exist in our static list. Now see that the status code is 40404, but the reason phrase is not changed to product ID not found. Okay, product ID not found. And once again, if we look at this response part, we see that the detailed message is there, no product with ID 4 found, right? So these are some simple customization in case of handling errors, so that the client will know exactly what kind of error has occurred. Second way is to use the exception filter. It is like I told you, you can use it similar to the action filter. You can apply it at the action level, controller level, or globally. And then whenever an exception occurs inside that action or any of the action method of the controller, our exception filter will be executed. But you have to remember, this exception filter will be executed only if the thrown exception is of not this type, which was the previous case, the first case that we have discussed. If it doesn't throw the exception of this type, then only this will be executed. Okay, so remember this. Let us see what are the property of this class. It is derived from object, attribute, and filter attribute classes. So here we have to use this class, exception filter attribute. Exception filter attribute. And now you know that whenever we have the class with the suffix attribute, you can decorate any method or class with this exception filter. So we have to customize it, and even you can see that this is an abstract class. It is an abstract class which is derived from filter attribute, iException filter, and iFilter. So these are some internal interfaces and the classes. But one of the important methods of this class is abstract class is on exception or on exception async. So asynchronous version or synchronous version. So whenever there is an exception, this method will be executed on exception. So we can override this method and we can write our custom exception filter. So let us see how to do that. And if you want to go for the asynchronous version, you have to use this execute exception filter async. So we'll see the first way. This already I have discussed. You can use the exception filter and register it at the action level, at controller level. That means it will be applicable for all the methods of that particular controller, and you can register it globally also. So once again, we create a new class called my exception filter attribute. See the convention, always when we are creating attribute class, it must have the suffix attribute. So we follow the exception, we follow the convention, and it is derived from this class exception filter attribute, which is an abstract class. And now we are going to override on exception method. Now it has one parameter, HTTP action executed context. So this context contains all the information about the which action method was there, what was the error. So right now we are interested in the exception. So if this context dot property called exception is of specific type, suppose null reference exception, then we customize this return value. So what we customize? The response object. So it has this property response object, we create our own response object, HTTP response object with the status code internal server error. And reason phrase null reference exception occurred. Okay, so this we are customizing response and reason phrase. So the step is very simple. You derive your custom class, give the appropriate name, derive it from exception filter attribute, and override this method on exception, and you modify the response message. So what we have modified, the status code and the reason phrase. So this context, HTTP action executed context, has the property called response. So I think we had that HTTP action executed. Not in the slide, but as an extra documentation, I will attach this class information for this additional classes. So basically, this will generate this HTTP response message of your given error message and reason phrase, error code or status code and reason phrase. And now you can use that name, your class name, my exception filter, decorate your action method, suppose add product like. So right now we want to, this is basically a post action method. That means whenever there is a HTTP post request, this method will be executed. And basically we want to add a product which is coming from the client. So if you see the code, we are not checking for whether this product is null or not. So there's a possibility that if the client is not sending the data, this product is null, and we are trying to assign this product ID, name, and price. So it will throw an exception. Which exception? Null reference exception, right? And that should be handled by this filter, my exception filter. Right? So this code doesn't check for the whether this product is null or not. Right? And it is trying to add the product. So suppose we issue the post request to the this is the endpoint API/product, but request body is empty, nothing present inside the request body. And if we click on the send button, it will be received and it will throw this exception. Null reference exception occurred. So this is the reason phrase that we have customized, and the status code is 500. Normally you will see the internal server error, and you will have no idea about what kind of error or what kind of root cause of the error. And if you want to apply it globally, what you do, you go to the this web applications class. We have this start method, application start method. There all the configurations are taking place. So within the global configuration, there is a configuration class having filters. Using add filters collection, using add, you can add the new instance of your custom class. So normally we call it as an exception filter. Okay, we call it as an exception filter. So just provide the instance of your own custom exception filter, and it will register it globally. Okay, it will register it globally. So in any of the controller class action method, if this particular type of exception is generated, null reference exception, then it will create the custom response message. And otherwise, there is also an alternative way. You can use this asynchronous method, execute exception filter async. So there is also code is written here. I am handling this index out of range exception. So you can also refer it. It's similar to what we have already done. So you can customize this response, and you can create the error response. You can change the status code to bad request. You can change the reason phrase. The item is out of range. Likewise, you can customize this. Okay, third way in which we can gracefully handle the exception is use of HTTP error object. This object you can send as part of the response, HTTP response. So in the HTTP response, you have it is divided into two parts, header and body. Within body, you can send this HTTP error message. This object can be sent as part of the HTTP response body. And of course, it would be serialized before it would be sent. So far we have seen directly we can use the request object, and there is a static method called create response. You can specify the status code and the data that will be serialized to whatever that media using the media type formatter. Suppose I want to search for the product with the given ID. We are iterating through the entire list, and if we find the product with the given ID, then we create the response. Basically, it will generate the object of HTTP response message. And here you can, it is overloaded, so even you can specify the status code and the content. Otherwise, what you can do, there is also another static method, request dot create error response, wherein you can specify that status code not found and the message. Now, what is this message? This is custom message, that product ID product with the ID not found. So specific ID not found. So this create error response is an extension method. Basically, this is an extension method. It is defined in this namespace, and internally it will create the error response, and it will pass this HTTP error object as part of the HTTP response body. Okay. So this is the indirect way of sending the HTTP error object. There is also another way you can customize it. Before that, let us test it. Suppose I want to retrieve the product with the ID 50, which doesn't exist in my database. Then I get this message 404 not found. And if you look at this response part, okay, if you look at this response, you see something like this error message, product with ID 50 not found. Basically, this is a HTTP error object which is serialized into the XML. Model validation we already seen. You can annotate your model with the required string length, range. So this code we already seen. Like suppose once again, if you want to add the product, and we check that model state is valid. If it is valid, then only we have to send the successful message. Otherwise, if the model state dot is valid property is false, then we create error response. So now we are setting the status code, and as part of the body, we are sending the model state, entire model state. Okay, whatever the status of the model state will be sent. This object we are sending as part of the HTTP response body. Otherwise, usually we create the new product, assign the ID, add to the product, and finally send the message that okay, the operation of adding the product was successful. Even sometime you can also send the product object as part of the response to verify that to the client that product was added and this product was added. So these are some convention for interacting with the client. Now we test our API. So once again, we issue the post request. Endpoint is API/product. And I think, yeah, here it is content type application slash JSON. So this, remember, post appropriate endpoint content type. Don't forget, we need to write this, provide the object product ID is missing right now. And now if we click on the send button, uh, we get this response for 400 bad request. And if you look at the response tab, we get the request is invalid. So this is the model state. Okay, and then model state. So model state, I think, yeah, here it is not visible. So this is not wrapped. The output is not wrapped. So I have used the tool to see the actual message, and this is the message. This is the model state object, and the message will contain product ID. Product ID is field is required. Product name must be the string of maximum length 5. Product price must be within the range 0 to 5,000. So this product model state, entire model state, can be sent back to the client to further verify that the data must satisfy this constraint, this set of constraints. So further detail would be provided. The request is invalid. Why? What could be the possible reason? Like this. These are the constraints on the data. Right. So this is useful while you are developing the code, because you will not know why the code doesn't work or it is throwing an exception. So to pinpoint the exact location or the reason why the code which generated this exception, you can send this detailed error message to the client. So during development time, we use it extensively. Okay, fine. So this is about this exception handling. Any doubt so far? I think this is quite easy, and probably you can use it easily. You can apply your custom filter, or you can use the extension method like create response or create error response. Sorry. There are two methods, or you can use create error response. And as part of that, you can also specify the status code and even the data. It will be passed inside the response body, and it will be automatically serialized by the appropriate media type formatter, and that will be done by the content negotiator. Will be taken care by the content negotiator. Based on the client input, whether the client can understand or requesting the JSON data, or it is requesting the XML data, it will convert this data. It will convert this data into the appropriate format. Okay, whether XML, JSON, or custom data. Okay, fine. So now today's lab and subsequent lab, there is no assignment. So whatever you have to finish it with your project, and you have to try out these examples regarding the web API, your web API examples, and you can practice with that. I have already said these slides to you, so you can try it out. Very simple code are there. So within the existing code, you can easily add this code and try yourself. And now we will have any doubt regarding this project submission, because I think we'll see that whether we have any doubt regarding project submission, you can ask right now. Okay, report. You have to submit report. You have to submit the report. But in the report, you have to provide only what you have done. For example, if it is an SRS, then you need not write down all the requirement. Only those requirements that you have implemented. Similarly, we'll share the report format with you, and in that it will not be full-fledged report. Full-fledged. We'll specify what you have to provide as part of the report. Probably today or maybe in this week, we'll share the report format with you. Just let me check in the Google Classroom. If I've already done, I can share it right now. If your project is implemented, I don't think it will take hardly more than a day to prepare the report. And still we have sufficient time for the submission. No, see that already I think your requirements are clear. Already we have prepared the requirement. I don't think you are developing full-fledged project. Only one or two entities for which you will be implementing the CRUD operations. So hardly your SRS would be consisting of 2-3 pages, not more than that. Similarly, in the design diagram, you need to provide only class and use case diagram, not everything. So it would be succinct report which can be prepared in a maximum a day, not more than that. So just let me check. Okay, I have just said this assignment. I just created the assignment and I have also provided the report format. So you can go through it and just let me know if you find any difficulty in understanding any of this thing. So as part of the design diagram, you need to provide only use case class diagram and the data dictionary. So we'll see that even preparing a report will be easy enough. It will not take much time. So probably 1 page for use case diagram, 1 page, maximum 2-3 page for SRS, 1 page class diagram, 1 page data dictionary, and even as part, then you will have the just what are the different modules. So hardly it will not be longer report. So just go through that and you'll see that it is not that much lengthy. No, it is not necessary to implement login and register. Directly you can go to the CRUD operation. It is already conveyed many a times, right from the beginning. No, in SRS, you have to only write down the requirement that you have implemented, not the entire project. For example, you have implemented only the CRUD operation on, say, customer, then only you have to specify the CRUD operation for customer, CRUD operation for product. Likewise, only those requirements you have to specify, not everything. Whatever you have implemented, right? Otherwise, for the project, the requirement may be so much detailed requirement might be there, but you need not specify all the requirement. Only the include only those requirements that you have implemented. Don't or exclude the remaining requirement. Otherwise, it will look like you are specifying many requirement, but you have not implemented it. So it depends upon your application whether they are dependent or not, but that is fine. See that this is the minimum requirement, right? If some of you are done more work, then it is good. We are talking about the minimum requirement, right? So someone might be more interested and they might be do more work. So it is always welcome. So it is depending on your interest and how much time and efforts you do for developing the project. It is up to you, completely up to you. It will vary from one student to another. So one front page, then one certificate page, then one page for table of content, one or two page for introduction, one page SRS, one or two page SRS, three pages for one page use case, one page class diagram, one page data dictionary, one page for implementation detail, testing maybe one or two page, screenshot maybe four or five, or depending upon the screenshots, maximum five. So in one page you can also put two screen images, two screens images. One page conclusion, one page limitation, and finally one page bibliography. So just count down number of pages and the work required for that. See that again, this we already told you that this project is for WCF. Right from the beginning, we have told you that you have to develop WCF. Because WCF we already covered before the second sessional, we have completed the WCF, and that's why we expected that you implement it during the third session. And those who started early, they might have already finished it. But some of you are waiting for the submission time, and then you will be, uh, then you will awake and then start doing the project. Is it so? See the assignment. Instruction is there. Okay, now I think you should be able to see the assignment. Just download the report and see the report format. And if you have any doubt, you can discuss. No, video link is not required. You have to provide the screenshots as part of the project report. Even don't write the code, don't include the code as part of your project report. Don't include your source code as part of the project report. Last date for submitting project report is 6th April. And those of you who have not submitted the previous assignment, submit it. This is required as part of the term work. If you are not submitting, your marks will be according to the number of submission. So those of you who have not submitted some of the assignment, then submit it before the submission date. And if it is you have not submitted more than 5 assignment, your term work will not be granted. So pending submissions, first of all check for the pending submission, and complete those pending submission of the previous assignments, and also you have to finish with your project and prepare a report. Okay, fine. So we are here. If you can work with your project, you can work with the this product API. You can experiment with the action filter. You can experiment with the exception filter. You can also connect your web API project with the database. You can use entity framework, and then you can send the data back to the client. So experiment with all those features. And if you find any difficulty, just ask your doubts during the lab time. We are here for any query or for solving the doubt.
Are you ready for